Hey yo people from the internet! Today, for our tiny little gamey, we're going to smash our heads against a wall to create a spawning system for pretty much all of the enemies inside the game. Basically, in pretty much any video game, some enemies have specific places to spawn. So for example, in 3D games like Dark Souls, most of the time the enemies are placed manually inside each room because they don't really move that much. Meanwhile, in 2D games like Touhou, you can spawn them in two ways. The first way is to actually place the enemies manually, but that's kind of bullshit. And my way, that actually creates something that will read the patterns for the enemies and spawn them. And since I couldn't really find anything like that around the internet, and being a game dev also requires some thinking, I guess we can start with that. The only thing you gotta do is subscribe and leave a like. To start today's project, we gotta figure out how to actually create the file with the patterns of the enemies. And we gotta make them spawn either in multiple groups at the same time or just one after the another. To do that, I made this abomination. And if you didn't understand anything that's being shown here, don't worry, because I forgot to after like 5 minutes after I made that. So anyway, what we're gonna do is create a file, make a scene that, just like the dialog manager, will create the file with this structure for the JSON. And I spent like 2 or 3 days just to figure out how to actually save this as an actual file, as an actual structure. That's because I like making stuff harder for me. And when I finally did it, we now had to make the spawning system. After that, we're going to make sure that the script will start reading after the patterns in the group 1. Basically, what the script does for spawning the enemies is loading the file, okay? We start iterating, okay, for the group. So we start with group 1 and inside group 1, and then check all of the variables, create the variables, and call the maximum number for the enemies that are inside the group. And we have a while cycle, while loop, where we iterate for patterns and the group number. We get the number of enemies for all of the groups. The enemy spawning actually happens here. So for each of the maximum number of enemies plus 1, because for some reason it doesn't really do well. For some reason, we make them have the max health with the health property, and then add child with the code deferred, because otherwise we'll throw an error. And then if it's the first one of, let's say, 5 enemies and they are all on the left side of the screen, the first one will be spawning at the coordinates we told in the file, and the other ones will be spawned after 0.5 seconds from one another, and let's say for the left minus 50x from the first one. And how do we tell the script that we have killed all of the enemies, or the enemies simply got out of the screen area? Inside the enemies, we send a signal inside the group finished function. We check if the end called, which will be 0 at the start, is less than the maximum numbers of enemies for all of the inside groups. Then we iterate it again until they match up, and when they do, we switch for the next group and load again. The only limit is pretty much the how many groups you will give the game. That's done. We gotta make sure that the game doesn't crash anymore, because it did multiple times. And on a side note, each level will have its own file. So technically, if someone were to mod the game for whatever reason, they will also have an easier way to actually place the enemies inside a level, because the game automatically loads any script, both for the enemy spawning and the dialogues, if they have the same name as the word. So yeah, pretty much you gotta figure out how to make the game load a new scene. And yeah, we're pretty much done with this. and I hope you guys understood something new here. I promise I'll make different types of videos instead of just Godot stuff. But hey, I'll probably make a video about learning Blender since I kind of need that for future projects. So that's fun. Stay tuned, stay gamey, and see you soon.